Okay, it's 6:30, so let's get started. Welcome everybody. I'm Vivian New. I'm going to be your host tonight, and the talk tonight is by Rick Flores, and it's on the Amah Mutsun, Traditional Knowledge to Steward Mother Earth. And just going to go through a little bit before we get started. First of all, I wanted to acknowledge that the work done by the Santa Clara Valley chapter of CNPS lies in the homeland of the Muwekma Ohlone, the Amah Mutsun tribal band, the Tamian Nation, and the Ramayatush Ohlone. They still live and thrive in this area today, and we hope to learn from them and support their work to restore traditional practices and heal from historical trauma. If you are joining us for the first time, we would love to know how you found out about us and where you are. So if you're comfortable with that, please share that information in the chat. And our talks are not just your host and you're the speaker. We have a whole team for these things. And tonight, the team is Gladys Mercier and Kelvin Liu, who will be watching the chat on both YouTube and on Zoom. And they will be helping to read your questions to Rick at the end of his talk. And if you are not familiar with the California Native Plant Society, we are a nonprofit environmental organization founded in 1965. We have over 10,000 members in 35 chapters that are spread all over the state and actually beyond the borders of the state and the country, because we also have a chapter in Baja California. Our chapter is the Santa Clara Valley chapter, and we cover Santa Clara County as well as southern San Mateo. Our mission is to save California's native plants and their habitats through science, education, conservation, and gardening. If you are not currently a member, we would love to have you join us. Your support of this movement will help to conserve California's native plant diversity. And members receive 2 amazing journals, Artemisia, which has a more science-based focus, and then Flora, which has a lot of general interest topics about native plants. As a member of our chapter, you would also receive our Blazing Star chapter newsletter, which tells you about events like this, as well as other articles of local interest. And you also receive discounts at participating local nurseries. So if you are not currently a member and that sounds like something that would be of interest to you, all you have to do is go to cnps.org/join, and you can sign up online. Our chapter has a couple other or several other activities coming up soon. So we have 2 habitat restoration sessions in August at Lake Cunningham in San Jose. Those are on Saturdays starting at 8 in the morning. You can find out more about them on Meetup. You do need to RSVP in advance if you want to attend, but it's a lot of fun and a great way to learn about native plants and help maintain the native plant garden there. If you are a photographer or if you just like to look at pretty pictures of native plants, our photography group meets on the last Friday of every month. The next meeting is on August 26th. It is on Zoom. And to find out more about that and to get the Zoom link, you can either go to our Meetup group or our website, cnps-scb.org, and there's information about those meetings. And our next talk is going to be at the beginning of September. It's Local Native Plants for Bay Area Gardens, and Arvind Kumar, who is a former chapter president, amazing gardener, and all-around wonderful person, will be doing that talk. And I don't have a slide for the, and I just realized I forgot to do a slide. We are going to have our chapter is 50 years old this year. So we are having a big birthday celebration for ourselves on October 8th. And that will be combined with our fall plant sale, which, like previous COVID years, will be an online sale with pickup at the event, which will be at the Dana Center at Hidden Villa. There will be more information about that in the upcoming Blazing Star on our website and just about anywhere else we can plaster that information. So save the date, and I hope to see you there. We have a lot of fun stuff planned for that event. And another way to make sure that you are up on the latest goings on of the chapter is to be on our chapter news mailing list. It's a once a week notification about things that are going on. So if you are not currently subscribed to that list, it's very easy. It's open to everybody. It's a Google group. That email address to subscribe is there at the bottom of this slide. But you can also go to cnps-scv.org and information is there as well. So a little bit of housekeeping before the talk starts. Please make sure your microphones are muted. As I mentioned before, if you have any questions, please ask them at any time, but do it in the chat. And so we have Gladys and Kelvin who are watching the chat, and we'll make sure that your questions are shared with Rick at the end of his talk. We do, I did not update my slide. We do expect to finish by 8 o'clock. And this is both on YouTube and on Zoom. It is recorded on YouTube, so you can watch it again later, share it with your friends. I think this is a really important topic. I think it's going to be really interesting. And so please feel free to look at it again and share it with your friends. I met Rick when I went to one of the Pie Ranch work days, and he's a pretty amazing person. He is the director of horticulture and the steward of the Amah Mutsun Relearning Program, which is based at the UCSC Arboretum and Botanic Garden. He's worked there for over 20 years, and he has both a BA and MA in environmental studies from UCSC. He's also a research associate for the Amah Mutsun Land Trust, and he's a board member at Pie Ranch. And I'm just so amazed and happy that I had the opportunity to meet him at Pie Ranch, and I'm extra happy that he is here with us tonight to talk about this this work that is going on with the Amah Mutsun. So Rick, I am going to turn it over to you now.
Great. I'm going to take a second here to share my screen. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. Well, thank you for having me here today. As mentioned, my name is Rick Flores, and before I begin, I usually let folks know that you know, I am not Native American or a member of any California tribe. My dad is Filipino Hawaiian. My mom is Irish. So my words today are informed by my work with the tribe, and I've been working with them since 2009, and also informed by some time I spent in grad school as well. But I do not speak for any tribe for that matter. So this is going to be a little bit of a different talk, I would imagine, than you know, you're used to at a CNPS. I'm going to talk about the Amah Mutsun tribal band's efforts to relearn cultural knowledge to revitalize their culture, and what they're relearning is what's known as traditional ecological knowledge. In my work with the tribe, you know, it's important for people to understand why there is a need to relearn. And that speaks to the way colonization unfolded here on the Central Coast and throughout California. So I do talk about colonization in my talk. But first, I'd like to talk about what we know of tribes pre-contact. And so if you do a search, internet search for, you know, California Indian tribal territories, this is the map you usually come up with. California was an incredibly diverse place at the time of contact. There were somewhere between 400 and 600 autonomously functioning tribes, and there were about 100 different languages and many dialects of those languages. So actually what you're looking at here is not tribal territories. It's early anthropologists' attempts to make sense of that diversity. And what they've done is they've lumped language groups together. So that's what this map represents. It's actually, you know, language alliances. You can see on the Central Coast, they listed as Costanoan. That is not an indigenous name or even an indigenous word. That word is derived from the Spanish word costeños, which simply means people of the coast. In this area, you've also heard the term Ohlone. You know, I'm not going to read this slide, but the name came from one tribe on the San Mateo coast up near Pescadero that the Spanish called the Ohlone tribe, and they spelled it O-L-J-O-N. And then there was a switch in spelling in some publications, in various newspapers. And then you had Alfred Kroeber, who's the father of the anthropology department at UC Berkeley, used that term in his 1910 Handbook of American Indians North of Mexico, which then popularized the term Ohlone into academia. And then you had Malcolm Margolin write his book, Ohlone Way, which was published in 1978, which then popularized the term Ohlone into more American mainstream culture. But if we zoom in to the Central Coast, you can see all these smaller names. Those are all names of tribes that were in the area. The capitalized terms are the language groups. It was really great to see the Santa Clara CMPS have that land acknowledgement at the beginning of our session today. And then if we zoom in on the Central Coast, now these maps are not, set in stone. There's still a lot that we're learning about Native Californians pre-contact. So, take this map with, a little bit of a grain of salt. It's in general, these are the tribal territories that were here at the time of contact. But, for thousands of years, Native Californians employed what's known as traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK. That is a Western academic term. That is certainly not something, that Indigenous people named or used to describe their knowledge. It's a relatively new area of study within academia. It's only maybe about, 60, 70 years old. Compare that to things like physics and other disciplines, biology, that are hundreds of years old. I think we're really just scratching the surface. But one of the authors here, Frederick Berkes, he's done a lot of work worldwide on traditional ecological knowledge and resource management. And I like his work a lot. And academics have defined traditional ecological knowledge in different ways. But I like Frederick Berkes' definition here, which it's a cumulative body of knowledge, practice and belief evolving by adaptive processes and handed down through generations by cultural transmission about the relationship of living beings, including humans, with one another and with their environment. And so academics have tried to understand what, constitutes traditional ecological knowledge. Again, I like to use Frederick Berkes' work here. He analyzes it on 4 levels of analysis. On the first level, you have the local knowledge of land, plants, animals, ecosystems. On the second level, you have the land and resource management systems. So things like fire, which I'll talk about later, selective harvesting, copicing, which simply means cutting plants to the ground and letting them resprout. On the third level, you have the social institutions. So what governs those management practices? When is the appropriate time to go out and harvest certain plant materials? When is the appropriate time to hunt or set fire to the landscape? And then on the fourth level, you have what's known as the worldview. And there's a term that's been coined by native scholar Enrique Salmon that's called kincentricity, or concentric ecology. And he explains it as this: to Indigenous people, humans are at an equal standing with the rest of the world. They are kindred relations. In addition, Indigenous people believe that the complex interactions that result from this relationship enhance and preserve the ecosystem. It is understood that human practices such as burning and pruning promote new growth of shrubs, trees, and grasses. This attracts animals such as birds to sprouting trees and shrubs, and mammals such as deer and elk to grasslands. This concept of concentricity with the natural world is what is being referred to as concentric ecology. And so within traditional ecological knowledge is what's known as traditional resource and environmental management. And that is the application of traditional ecological knowledge to maintain or enhance the abundance, diversity, and or availability of natural resources or ecosystems. And so there's a wonderful book that was written by Kat Anderson, published about 2005. If anybody wants to take a deeper dive into how Native Californians were managing native plant resources, I very much recommend this book. But these are some of the things that Native Californians were doing at the time of contact to steward plant populations, to cultivate certain plants, and to sustain ecosystems. The important note about this quote is that, with cultivation, they encourage desired characteristics of individual plants, increase populations of useful plants, but they also altered the structures and compositions of plant communities through their traditional ecological knowledge. And I'm going to come back to this point at the end of my talk. But without doubt, fire was the most significant tool that Native Californians used here in California. Through it, they were able to burn extensive tracts of land, even small patches of land. When we think of fire today, sometimes the first thing that comes to mind are these really hot, catastrophic wildfires that are moving quickly through the landscape. Indigenous burning was very different. Typically, landscapes were burned in the fall through the spring, when the weather was cool, when the ground was damp. And so what you got were these low intensity, slow moving fires that just kind of creep through the landscape. And because they were burning with regularity, there just wasn't a lot of fuel on the landscape to create these kind of catastrophic wildfires. The thought today is that they were burning coastal prairies roughly every 3 to 5 years. There's evidence through the work on fire scars in redwoods that the redwood forests and other woodlands were burned roughly every 7 to 12 years. And so likely what they were operating on was what's known as the intermediate disturbance hypothesis. And this is an ecological theory that basically says that there's a sweet spot in disturbance that creates the highest amount of species richness. And so through these burning practices, burning the coastal prairies every 3 to 5 years, the forests every 7 to 15 years, that type of disturbance led to the greatest amount of species richness in the landscape, for which they subsisted on for thousands of years. And so burning, enhanced landscape heterogeneity, biological diversity, and the availability of economic resources. Burning was so extensive here on the Central Coast that the Spanish recorded it during their first overland expedition into this area along the coast. The first overland expedition was the Portola expedition in 1769. You can see that they were traveling north in October 16th of that year, and they returned to roughly on the same route during November. But they had with them a priest and an engineer on their journey, and they were recording the landscape because they were looking for places to build their missions. They were looking for pasture land to bring over their sheep and their cattle. They were looking for timber harvests, and they were looking for fresh water. And some of the things that they recorded were really quite interesting, that they were having a hard time finding campsites based on available unburnt pasture land to feed their horses. They recorded having a hard time finding downed firewood to cook with and to stay warm at night. And so you can see all those triangle shapes on this map here. Those are all the places that they encountered coastal prairies being burnt extensively during their expedition. And so when anthropologists look at the development of humans over time, they often see it as a linear progression. On one end, you have hunter-gatherer societies, and on the other end, you have agrarian or farming societies. Well, Native Californians didn't really fit either of those models. They were not simple hunter-gatherers because they were cultivating plants, they were sustaining ecosystems through traditional ecological knowledge, but they weren't agrarian either. They were not farming in this area of California. Having said that, though, their societies resembled more agrarian societies than hunter-gatherer societies in that they had sizable population densities. The Bay Area of California was the most densely populated region in North America, north of Mexico City at the time of contact. They were relatively sedentary. They didn't move around a lot. The thought is that they were on the coastal prairies during the spring and early summers when all those native plant harvests were available. And then they moved up into the mountains during the summer, where they found the nut and berry harvests. They had complex religious and social institutions as well, and they were storing large quantities of food. They were storing large quantities of seeds and nuts. So those things resemble more agrarian societies than they do hunter-gatherer societies. And so when you look at this kind of interaction between human and plants, Native Californians fall into this middle category here, which is called Proto-Agriculture. And again, you could see the different management practices that they were employing here. In the text of the figure, you can see that Native American tribes in California did not domesticate crops, yet they still managed and cultivated wildland environments with an array of techniques causing changes at different scales of biological organization. And so, you know, proto-agriculture can sound like it's a society that's on its way to full-scale domestication or farming, but that's not necessarily what it means. Proto-agriculture is not necessarily a transitional state to full domestication or field agriculture. Rather, it can be a long-term stable adaptation. So basically, through traditional ecological knowledge, they were creating stable states within the environment, sustaining certain ecosystems that were important to their survival and to their uses. And they were also storing large quantities of food as well. So these types of things allow them to be able to depend on certain harvests year after year. And so for every day of every year for millennia, you know, the indigenous people of California interacted with the native plants and animals that surrounded them. And so, as I mentioned, you know, the first overland expedition into this area was a Portola expedition in 1769. Mission Santa Cruz was founded in 1791. So within the span of about 20 years, life started to change pretty drastically for Native people. You can see the numbers here on the screen. You know, 81,000 people would be baptized in the missions between 1769 and 1834. Of those, 60,000 had died by 1834. The important note about these numbers is that they are only counting the indigenous people who were baptized and died in the missions. They are not counting the countless others that died outside of those missions. You know, I go through this colonization again just so people understand why Native people have lost some knowledge and are currently revitalizing their cultures through various relearning efforts. You know, there's two narratives of the Spanish missions. If anybody grew up in California, you probably went through the 4th grade mission curriculum. That narrative told you that the Spanish missions were these kind, benevolent institutions here to save souls. There's another narrative of the missions, that they were cruel institutions and cruel to Native people. In the missions, Native people were not allowed to speak their languages for the most part. They were not allowed to practice their culture, go out and tend the land as their ancestors once did. In the missions, women were kept in one barracks, men in another, children in another, so that passing down of knowledge became very difficult for Native people during the time because families were separated. There were a lot of atrocities in the missions, instances of rape between Spanish soldiers and the Native women. If you look at the Spanish birth records, there's a lot of father unknowns on those birth records in the mission periods. And the Amah Mutsun tribal band interpret that as instances of rape because a Native father would never not take responsibility for his own child. So the Spanish mission period lasted, you know, late 1700s into probably around the 1840s. Then there was a brief Mexican period here in California where there were these huge land grants given out to Mexican farmers and ranchers. Again, just like the missions, they needed labor to run these ranches. And just like the missions, they would go out and raid Native villages and bring back Native people to use as captive slaves. One of the oral histories within the Amah Mutsun tribal band is the way that they would capture Native people. And they would raid the villages and they would target the women first. and they would tie the women up by their thumbs and march them back to the missions or the ranches. They did it this way because they knew instinctively that children would follow their mothers, and that ultimately the fathers would come into the missions looking for their families. I'm not exactly sure when this flyer was out. This is provided by the Bancroft Library, UC Berkeley. But what you're looking at is a young Native girl or woman being sold into slavery for a bottle of brandy and some gunpowder. And then came the American period in the 1850s. This was a time when gold was found here in California. And there was a big gold rush of Europeans coming from the East Coast to the West Coast to strike it rich. Now California had this Indian problem, and they were deciding what to do about it. And these were the actual words of our first governor of California, Peter Burnett. He said in his first address to Congress that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the two races until the Indian race becomes extinct, must be expected. And our state funded, bullets and militias, the equipment for the militias to go out and hunt and kill Native Americans during this time. And how did they fund the militias and the resources they needed? Well, at the time, they were selling bonds. You think of bonds today, they're used to improve infrastructure, public schools and things like that. In the 1850s, the state of California was selling bonds to fund the expeditions against the Indians. And you could see that in the boldface print, kind of second line below the artwork there. Expenses of certain expeditions against the Indians. This one was from May 3rd, 1852, and $250 was a lot of money in that time. So people were actually making money off the genocide or attempted genocide of Native peoples. This period has actually been written about. There's a recent book that was published in 2016 by Benjamin Madley. He's a historian and a faculty member at UCLA. He basically, he basically goes through this period of American history and goes through newspaper clippings and archives. Over 9,000 Native Americans were murdered during this period of genocide in California's history. And then during the later half of the 19th century, those Native people that survived all these atrocities were then sent to these boarding schools where they were meant to civilize them. Again, just like in the missions, it was used to assimilate Indians into the dominant society and erase all aspects of Indian traditional life. And then what's not really talked about much is the role that the early North American conservation movement played in the violent dispossession of Native Americans from their landscape. We all know John Muir. He's the father of our conservation movement. He helped establish the national park system. But John Muir was a racist. He was into eugenics. He had disparaging remarks to say about Black people, about Jewish people, and he did not even believe Native people belonged on the landscape. And he advocated for their violent removal of them from lands in California. If you don't know, the name Yosemite comes from the cry heard by the Mariposa Battalion as they burned the Indian villages in Yosemite Valley. That word is the Awanichi word for killers, and that's what the Awanichi were screaming when the U.S. cavalry was raiding their village sites. And so, though he depicted it otherwise, John Muir's unblemished wilderness was in fact a space of violent, racially driven dispossession, one of a series of forced removals, massacres, and impoverishments that had reduced the Native American population in California. These brutal acts created the conditions not only for the wild Sierra that Muir and others exalted over so passionately, but also the sullen calm they energetically experienced there. And so all of this is carried through academia as well. This is from a book, Natural History of the Human Species. This writing is from Dr. S. Neelan, that was published in 1852. You could see that he writes, the whole mass of facts leads to the conclusion that the dark races are inferiorly organized and cannot, to the same extent as the white races, understand the laws of nature and therefrom attain an increasing light and knowledge, that they bear the stamp of their inferiority in their physical organization. And this type of language, this kind of prejudice and racism has continued well into, the 20th and even in the 21st century in some areas of the world. And so all that brings us to the Amah Mutsun tribal band today. You could see that through no fault of their own, because of this violent colonial history, that they have lost some knowledge pertaining to stewardship, traditional ecological knowledge, ethnobotany, cultivation of native plants, and they're working hard today to relearn that information to revitalize their culture. Early on, when I showed the different levels of analysis, the first level being knowledge of plants and animals, the second level being the knowledge of management resource systems, the third level being the social institutions, and the fourth level being the worldview, the concentric worldview. It's important to note that what the Amah Mutsun are relearning are those first two levels of analysis. Throughout time, they have held on to their social institutions, and they've also held on to their worldview of concentricity. To give you a little bit about the tribe, there's about 800 enrolled members in the tribe. And what most people know is that the vast majority of their membership does not live within their tribal territory. Most of the tribal membership lives out in the Central Valley, Hanford, Madera, Modesto areas. In the early 1900s, there was a large movement of tribal members into the Central Valley where they found work on large ranches and farms. They are a poor tribe. They are not federally recognized, and they've remained out in the Central Valley. They do suffer from historical trauma, and that is one of the reasons for these cultural revitalization efforts, is to help them heal from that. And so again, speaking to the worldview, this is what started the Amah Mutsun's efforts to relearn traditional ecological knowledge. This is a quote from Chairman Lopez. In 2005, tribal elders came to a tribal council meeting and said, we have to get back to caring for the land. Creator never rescinded our obligation to care for Mother Earth. And so, the question is, how does the Amah Mutsun tribal band, who is poor, landless, doesn't even live within their traditional territory, how does a Indigenous community like that go about relearning efforts? Well, the Amah Mutsun are relearning in three different ways, one of which is through the work between Ascension Solorzano and John Harrington. Ascension is seen as the matriarch of the Amah Mutsun tribal band. She was the last native-born speaker of the Munson language. She was born somewhere in the 1850s, passed away in the early 1930s. From a very young age, she was seen as a knowledge holder, and she was trained at Pinnacles National Park in ethnobotany. Excuse me. She was a doctora, medicine woman. She ran a hospital out of her backyard in Gilroy. Doctors from San Francisco, Los Angeles would visit her from time to understand how she was treating people. The oral history of the Amah Mutsun tribal band is when Ascension was a young girl or woman, she had a vision that someone was going to come to her one day and want to record her knowledge, and she was to tell this person everything that she knew. Fast forward to the end of her life, she's been diagnosed with cancer. She knows she's dying. Around the same time, the federal government had sent out John Harrington to record elders' knowledge because the federal government knew that the elders were dying, and with their death, knowledge was being lost. John Harrington was a linguist and an ethnographer. He did a lot of work with various tribes here in California. If you don't know, there's a book called Shumash Ethnobotany by Jan Timbrook. That book is basically based on Harrington's interviews with the Shumash tribe at that time. But Harrington, he had known and heard about Ascension being this knowledge holder for quite some time. And somehow he heard of her diagnosis of cancer. And around the same time, Ascension moved from Gilroy to Monterey to live with her daughter. Harrington somehow found out where Ascension was living. The story the tribe tells is that, he knocked on her door. Ascension answered the door, and because of the vision she had, she said, "There you are. I've been waiting for you." She invited him in. For the last several months of her life, he lived in the basement of that house, and they worked together daily to record her knowledge, along with other Munson tribal members. And today there's roughly 80,000 pages of these notes at the Smithsonian that the tribe uses to relearn from. But they're not easy notes to transcribe. These are actual kind of notes from Harrington. You can see that he had really terrible handwriting. He never published anything. He was a bit of a kind of a paranoid academic. He was worried that people were going to steal his work. So this is kind of how the notes lay at the Smithsonian, and it's a lot of work to transcribe them. They're written in 3 different languages. They're written in Munson, Spanish, and English. And today I think there's roughly about 10,000 pages of these notes that have been transcribed. And the tribe uses these notes again to relearn traditional ecological knowledge and other stories from the tribe. The other way that they're relearning is from surrounding Indian tribes that were able to hold on to their knowledges better. A good example of this, these are pictures from a research project with the tribe that was done at Pinnacles National Park in 2009, 2010. But they were looking on the cultivation and stewardship of basketry plants. And to help us understand how Native people tend and cultivate basketry plants so that they actually produce quality and abundant material for basket weavers, we enlisted the help of Julie Text and her 2 daughters, Mandy Marine and Carly Text, who are pictured here. They are from the Dunlop Band of Mono Indians, so from the Sierras, and they have held on to their basket weaving knowledge and traditions through their matrilineal lines through countless generations. They came to Pinnacles National Park and showed us how they tend white-root sedge, how they burn the deer grass stands, which was also part of this project, and what kind of quality and abundant material they're looking for. Without cultivation and without tending, white-root sedge does not produce quality and abundant rhizomes used in basketry. I once asked Julie, how is it that her tribe held on to this knowledge, whereas, the Amah Mutsun and other tribes had lost it. And her answer to me was, look at a map of the Spanish missions. They are more or less all along the coast of California, from San Diego to, Sonoma County. They did not go up into Northern California, and they did not go inland into the Sierras or Central Valley. So tribes in those regions were able to hold on to their knowledges better. And then the other way they're working to relearn is through the Amah Mutsun Land Trust. You could think of the Land Trust as a vehicle by which they use to engage with environmental organizations and Western academics to help them gain access to their traditional territory and also help them relearn. And these are a number of the different institutions that are working with the tribe today, state parks, at Wilder Ranch and other places, the Bureau of Land Management at the newly designated National Monument, Tony Costeries, National Park Service at Pinnacles National Park. The Sempervirens Fund was instrumental in helping to get the land trust kind of up and running with some seed funds. Academics, UC Berkeley, UC Santa Cruz are also assisting the tribe in their relearning efforts. And so the Amah Mutsun get a lot of, requests to work with them. And so to determine which lands are important for them to work on, what they've started are these integrative Indigenous cultural resource surveys, where they look for non-biological Native American cultural resources. They're looking for vegetation type and ethnobotanical resources that are significant to them. And they use this information to then determine whether or not to engage in the various collaborations that they're asked to. There are currently developing, 4 main programs of the Amah Mutsun Land Trust: native plant restoration, horticulture, and garden maintenance; coastal and ocean stewardship, to start looking at how native people were managing fisheries here in California; cultural burning and fire. One of the things they want to do is bring back native burning to the Central Coast, and also tribal, historic, and cultural preservation. And in terms of preservation, one of the things they're working on right now is to protect Eurostock, which is also known as Sargent Ranch. It's a piece of land that's kind of over where Highway 129 meets the 101. And it's currently under threat for gravel, sand, and mining operation. This company just released the EIR report, so we're in the process. They're in the process of public comment on the EIR report, and they're hoping that the public can help them keep the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors from issuing permits for Eurostock, because if this mining is allowed, it will devastate, that area of land. And cause irreparable harm to this significant culturally important site. At the heart of the Land Trust is the Native Stewardship Corps. This is a group of individuals from the tribe that come and work on the various research, restoration, and archaeology work of the Land Trust here on the Central Coast. They assisted with archaeological work at Coroste Valley, which I'm going to talk about in a bit. This is some archaeological work that was done near Wilder Ranch in collaboration with UC Berkeley archaeologists and grad students. The man in the overalls there, that's Mike Rohn. He's the new state park archaeologist for this district. They engage in cultural relearning, like how traditional fire was started through the fire drill and the fireboard. Traditionally, that drill that you use to spin and do the wood, that was made from elderberry. The board that they use is made from buckeye wood. And they've also started to bring fire back on the landscape. This was from a fire done at San Vicente Redwoods, just north of the UC Santa Cruz campus. You can see the camera equipment there. There was a PBS did a 4-part series on Native America, and this burn and the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band were featured in one of those parts of those episodes. At the UC Santa Cruz Arboretum, where I'm director of horticulture, we have the Amah Mutsun Relearning Program. We've been working with the tribe since 2009. Our gardens are open to them. They can come and harvest native plants from our garden as they need to. We've also held educational events, showcasing how to process acorns and turn it into food, how to process native grass seeds and turn that into food as well. We've also had traditional fire making workshops and things of that nature. We've also become a really good resource for the UC Santa Cruz campus. Prior to the relearning program, I don't know how much was being taught on traditional ecological knowledge of Native Californians. And we do a lot of that kind of guest lecturing in undergraduate courses. We also help, connect the land trust and the tribe with faculty and other people who are hoping to work with the tribe as well. And so just to kind of give you an example of some of the work that the tribe has done and why traditional ecological knowledge is important to the stewardship of our lands, but also to promoting biodiversity here in California. I'm going to talk about the work that was done at Croste Valley Cultural Preserve. It's a historically significant place. It's part of Año Nuevo State Park right now. When the first overland expedition, the Portola expedition in 1769 was coming up the coast, they were actually looking for Monterey Bay, and somehow they missed it. And they were really struggling along. The priest on that expedition was starting to read some of their members their last rites. They thought they were dying. The people of Croste found them and took them in and kind of nursed them back to health. The thought is that the expedition was suffering from scurvy and that they were fed manzanita berries, which are high in vitamin C, which then cured them of that scurvy. But it was only after they met the Croste people that they carried on north, and that's when they discovered San Francisco Bay. And so we know that Croste, was stewarded by Native people for thousands of years. After that, it was homesteaded. Throughout time, it had been preserved as kind of an open kind of rangeland or grassland. And that's kind of shown here in the bottom picture during a period of time when it was homesteaded. The Spanish also called this area Casa Grande because it had a huge roundhouse in it that they said was shaped like a half of a grapefruit and could hold a lot of people. And not every tribe in this area had those roundhouses. So it's thought that the Croste tribe was one of the, more powerful tribes in the area. The top picture here is what is happening to Croste Valley today. So you can see the grasslands are slowly disappearing. There's a plant succession happening into scrublands, things like coyote brush, which is baccharis, poison oak, coffee berries, blackberries, and Douglas fir trees are all starting to evade what was historically a grassland or coastal prairie. And so what the Amah Mutsun did in collaboration with archaeologists from UC Berkeley is they unearthed the old fire pits, and they separated out small burnt seed fragments from soil, analyzed those seed fragments to determine what Native people were burning and cooking in this area. And what they discovered is they were burning and cooking a lot of grassland seed foods. You could see in this picture the Poaceae family, that's our grasses, Mattia species, we think it was Mattia sativa, which is one of the sunflowers. Scirpus microcarpus was actually a new one for us, and a lot of the aster family. What's interesting is you hear a lot about acorn when you talk about native foods, but the nut harvest they found the most of in this particular archaeological site was our native hazelnut. So we now know that hazelnut is a very important part of the indigenous diet as well. And so vegetation mapping was also done during this project. And you could see the difference here. Rangeland, you could think of that as grasslands. You could see how more open it was as a grassland in 1982. You compare that to 2012, the vegetation map, and you could just see that without disturbance, without fire, that what was once a historical coastal prairie is now becoming a dug fir forest. And so Native people, knew that this would happen. And so they would regularly burn the coastal prairie to keep it open and productive and keep conifers and other shrublands at bay, because coastal prairies provided a lot of cultural resources for them. And so using that archaeological research, the tribe has started a nursery project to help restore Croste Valley. And this is up at Cascade Ranch. What they did is using that archaeological research, they now know there now. And so what they're doing is they're growing these plants in a field setting collecting the seeds off those plants, and then redistributing the seeds into Croste Valley to restore it to what it may have looked like prior to contact as a grassland. They're also planting plugs of native plants in Croste Valley as well. Some of the other things that they're doing is they're actually getting in there and cutting down Doug fir trees, removing things like Baccharis and stuff to hopefully restore the grasslands to what it once was. And so ecological restorationists are starting to understand this. They say that many seemingly natural ecosystems co-evolved with human inhabitants whose traditional cultural practices have transformed them into semi-cultural ecosystems. Such systems degrade from disuse following abandonment and become candidates for ecological restoration. If they are restored to their cultural state, then the cultural practices that previously maintained them should be resumed to ensure their sustainability. So these would be things like fire, selective harvesting, copicing, and so forth. And so without an Indian presence, the early European explorers would have encountered a land with less spectacular wildflower displays, fewer large trees, and fewer park-like forests. And the grassland habitats that today are disappearing in such places as Mount Tamalpais and Salt Point State Park might not have even existed in the first place. And you can add grasslands here on the Central Coast to that list as well. And so though, you know, the first European explorers, American trappers and Spanish missionaries entering California, you know, painted the state as a wild Eden, providing plentiful nourishment to its native inhabitants without sweat or toil. In actuality, the productive and diverse landscapes of California were in part the outcome of sophisticated and complex harvesting and management practices. And yet today we have this idea of wilderness in North America that was, you know, brought by people like John Muir. This is the definition that you find of wilderness in the Wilderness Act. Wilderness, in contrast with those areas where man and his own works dominate the landscape, is hereby recognized as an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain. Well, you know, this is, first of all, this is a complete erasure of indigenous history on the landscape. We know that Native people were not mere visitors who did not remain. They were here for thousands of years prior to European contact. But now with this recent research, we know that, you know, this area was not untrammeled by man. It was managed and stewarded and sustained for generations through traditional ecological knowledge. So what the first European explorers saw here was not a wilderness. It was a tended landscape tended by native people. And so though, you know, my talk has mostly been about, you know, traditional ecological knowledge and the effects that colonization had on traditional ecological knowledge, you know, the work of the tribe is really a way to, one, create relationships with their natural world kin, the plants and animals and ecosystems under that worldview of kincentricity. But also this work is really to uplift the tribe, to help them heal from historical trauma. As you can imagine, Native people around the world were made to feel inferior about their cultures and their knowledges, and we're just starting to scratch the surface about just how important their knowledge is to promoting biodiversity, but also sustaining ecosystems here in California as well. And I'll stop there. I'll say thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Rick. I don't know if Vivian wanted to say a few words before we get into questions.
Well, I just wanted to thank you for that talk. I mean, that was amazing. I knew some of the things, but the way you've just put everything together, and I mean, it just sort of blew me away. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, the full history of native California, has not been told. And, the information's out there in bits and pieces and in ethnographies and oral histories. There's really wonderful work being done today. One of my colleagues, Martin Rizzo, just wrote a book called We Are Not Animals, which was just published, which is all about kind of the indigenous experience here in Santa Cruz. So with more of these types of things being published and being written about, we're starting to get a much fuller picture of native California from pre-contact to today.
Yeah, I'm really so grateful that you did this for us. I think this is going to be a great resource because it's you can spend an hour and really just get a good start to understanding. I mean, there's so much more, as you pointed out, but an hour and you've got like the starting point. So, wow, just thank you so much, Rick. And go ahead, Gladys, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, okay. Okay, so let's start. There's a question here that says, Rick, can you please comment on how the policies of various governmental agencies or entities like the Bureau of Land Management and National Park Services and so on about seed collection they're causing restricted access of native peoples to plants that are part of their heritage, and are those policies likely to change?
Well, each of those organizations really manage lands and provide access in different ways. The Bureau of Land Management, as their name implies, is kind of more about management. There's still cattle ranching on BLM lands. There can still be logging on some BLM lands as well. The National Park System, still has this idea of wilderness where you're not allowed to go out and harvest or, plants and stuff like that. So does state parks in some ways. But what I can say is that the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band through the Land Trust has created these really, positive relationships with these land holding agencies. And the tribe does have access to some of those lands to go out and harvest native plant materials as they need. There are restrictions, of course, with any collecting permit. You can't harvest more than 30% or something, or 10%, I think it is, of a resource. One of the problems today is that, some of these plants that were traditionally used by native peoples just are not found in sustainable, harvesting quantities anymore. If you think about like our native geophytes, things like brodeas and calcordis that were traditionally harvested, they're typically known as Indian potatoes or wild onions. You just don't see those much anymore in the quantities to be able to sustainably harvest them and stuff. So there is restricted access. There is loss of, the quantities that the tribe is looking for to harvest from sustainably. But these institutions have granted the Amah Mutsun permission to go in and harvest plant materials as they need. One of the benefits to the relearning program actually at the Arboretum is that there's no access harvesting permits. The tribe can just say, hey, we're looking for some manzanita berries, and we can say there's a big harvest out there, in our gardens right now, feel free to go harvest them and stuff. So so yeah, that's best I can answer that question.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned the UC Santa Cruz Arboretum and the relearning program. What can the listeners of this webcast do? What can we do to help out?
Well, I mean, the Arboretum is a self-supporting unit on campus, which means we don't get any financial assistance from the campus. So our work with the tribe, the kind of educational workshops we put on, are always dependent upon funding levels and things like that. We do have volunteer days. There's one on Thursday where volunteers come out and help, plant and tend and weed what we call the California Conservation Gardens, which was the area that the tribe uses as well. So those are some of the ways to help.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Somebody, Natalie is asking, what were some of the grass seed types that have been found at these sites?
Yeah, so in that kind of pie chart I showed, it just said the Poaceae. And that's because in the archaeological work, that's all they can identify it as. They can only identify it as from the grass family. They couldn't oftentimes get it to genus or species. But having said that, there are still native grasses there in the valley, one of which is Bromus carinatus, which is our California brome. And that's the one that when we have had grass seed processing demonstrations with the tribe at the Arboretum, that's the grass that we use to demonstrate that process. Elamus glaucus, we think, was another really important one for Native people as well. But there's also purple needlegrass in Croste Valley right now, so that one may have been important as well. So, as I mentioned, we're just scratching the surface of this work. And so there's still a lot more to be uncovered, discovered, researched, and stuff like that. Getting things down to these specific, plant species is going to take some work.
Yeah. How about the impact of non-native plants on traditional ecological techniques?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but obviously California has some really bad exotic invasive weeds, the brooms, eucalyptus trees, even vinca has taken over some riparian areas and things like that. But, I had an interesting conversation with Kat Anderson, who is the woman that wrote that book, Tending the Wild, and Chairman Lopez on separate occasions about exotic plants. And, before I was director of horticulture at the Arboretum, I was curator of the California Native Plant Collection. And, the way I was trained is if it's not native, it needs to come out and stuff. And both Kat and Chairman Lopez had a different take on it. Their take is that what they said is that it's not the plant's fault that they are here. And we need to understand what they do, what they provide in the landscape. And only when we understand that, then can we make a determination about whether or not it should be, eradicated and stuff like that. So obviously, there's really bad ones. Vinca needs to come out. We need to get rid of the Scotch broom. These groves of eucalyptus trees are really damaging to any native plants that are underneath them because the chemicals in their leaves inhibit growth and stuff like that. But there's other weeds out there that don't take over the way the plants I mentioned do. And in that case, they suggest maybe we steward those plants too, and they just have a place now in our landscape.
So that's not something that's a daily fight. I mean, it's more of a negotiation.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It's a negotiation. Having said that, obviously the land trust has started helping, at Pie Ranch, they started helping take down some of the eucalyptus trees there. They had a cultural easement on the Costanoan property, that lodge that's there on the Central Coast. They were removing Jubata grass from that area as well. So they are doing invasive weed eradication. But, also, as I mentioned in my talk, it's also plant succession that's happening from native plants. You have coyote brush invading grasslands. You have Douglas fir trees invading grasslands. So it's not just non-native plants that are taking over traditionally culturally important ecosystems. It's also native plants taking over those ecosystems as well.
Yeah. Okay. There's a question from Kathy that asks, is there a similar movement in San Francisco? I don't know if she means the movement around the relearning or the Arboretum. Maybe
I'm
Kathy
not,
could explain a little more.
yeah, I'm not familiar. There is a tribe up in the East Bay, I think, that also started a land trust.
Hmm.
I'm drawing a blank, but it's important to note, Native American tribes are not homogeneous. They're not. Each tribe is going about their own, cultural revitalization efforts, or even like cultural efforts in different ways. And the example I gave today is one way that Indigenous community is going through their efforts.
Yeah, she was thinking of Native groups involved with TEK in San Francisco. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that area as much as I am the Central Coast.
Yeah. We don't have a ton of questions here. Is there a resource anywhere that starts to list that is talking about the kind of landscapes that existed in the different areas?
Oh, there's a book out there. What is it called? Changes in the Land. Is
Okay.
anybody familiar with that? It's a really pretty book actually, and there's some artist work in there, like watercolors and stuff, that where they paint kind of what the landscape may have looked like prior to contact and stuff. But a lot of what we know or what we learn from is what early European explorers described in their kind of journals and their writings of the landscape when they were coming over to California. So that's like a lot of historian archival research. I don't know how readily available that kind of information is to the public.
Sounds like a great book that someone needs to publish, research and publish. Yeah. So going back quickly to invasive things, we don't like stinkwort. Is it okay? Is it as bad as eucalyptus and vincas, or is it okay to like leave it alone?
Wait, can you remind me what the genus species of that is? I'm terrible with common names sometimes.
I don't know the weeds. What is it, Vivian?
The Trichia graveolens.
Thank you, Grace.
Yeah. If it's what I'm thinking of, that one's becoming pretty bad in various areas, at least here in Santa Cruz. There's a weed management association for the Santa Cruz Mountains. And I know that's one that has been talked about to eradicate from the land. But I don't know if there's ever been like any kind of ecosystem services study on what that plant actually provides, to the community of life.
Yeah. Okay. I just see some friends' names in here, and we have a thing about stinkwort. So, so how can local chapters help or facilitate or connect with tribes that are local to their areas? Because there's a lot of different peoples in California.
Yeah, so that's always a difficult one for me to consider because, sorry, I was trying to look for that book I mentioned, State of Change. So it takes time, and I can only speak from my own experience, working at the Arboretum and developing the relationship with the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band. It wasn't like we reached out to them and they said, hey, this is great, let's collaborate and work together. It took us years of constant communication and showing up when we said we were going to show up to help and assist and stuff like that, to kind of gain the trust of the tribe and to develop the relationship that we have to them today. So the best thing to do for any organization is to start reaching out. And, one of the things that we did at the Arboretum is we did not just say, when we held initial meetings with the tribe, we just didn't say, hey, we have this native plant garden, you want to come and use it, or, stuff like that. Our questions to them was, what are your community needs? Like, what are you going through right now? And is there a way the Arboretum could assist with any efforts you may have? So we opened the conversation that way. And it was during that time that they described this really terrible colonial history. And that because of that, people wanted to relearn native plant identification and ethnobotany. So that's kind of how the relearning program came about. So, and different tribes do different, are doing things in a different way. So that question is always kind of hard for me to answer. All I can say is be patient and get to know the community you want to work with, understand what their needs are, and then, ask them if there's a role that your organization can play to help them fill that need.
Okay. Getting a few more questions here. So the book Changes in the Land by William Cronin is the one?
No, William Cronin did. Yeah, he did a different book.
State of Change.
State of Change is the one I'm thinking of. Yeah.
Forgotten Landscapes by Laura Cunningham.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica, for that. It's great. Everybody just chimes in. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for helping me out there.
So I have a note that says, hello, Rick. I'm Divya, a senior at UCSC, majoring in EEB, which I assume is the ethnobotany, maybe? I don't know. Science education.
Ecology and evolutionary biology.
Okay, ecology and evolutionary biology, science education. Could you please speak on ways educators of elementary and K through 12 kids can help relearning and support the Amah Mutsun tribal band?
Oh, that's always a hard one too. I work mostly with college age students, but I do know that tribal members have gone into K through 12 classes to kind of introduce themselves and introduce the work of the tribe as well. As far as I know, there's no good books or anything at the K through 12 age range to help them understand their efforts. And, with the Amah Mutsun Land Trust, it's a very new organization. It was founded in 2014, which really wasn't that long ago. And so they are still currently building capacity to kind of, work with all these different institutions and stuff. But the way to support the tribe is to just start. And I don't know a good way to do this with K through 12. Just start telling the truth, about what you learned today. There's so much of California's history that is not being told related to the indigenous history of the area. And it's new information. There was a critical mission studies grant that got awarded to faculty at UCSC, where they started looking at the mission curriculum of the 4th grade. To start relooking at that. And one of the faculty, Judith Scott, created a book from an indigenous perspective of the mission system. So getting that book into the 4th grade curriculum is a good way. I have given tours to young kids, and one time I told the leaders, I talk about some hard truths because it's important for people to know why there's a need for this community to relearn. And they were just, the leaders of that group were just like, just tell it like it is. And I remember talking about genocide, and the little kids leaning over to the group leaders going, what is genocide? I don't know what genocide is and stuff. So just starting to get that information out there so that people understand the indigenous history of California is a way of support as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, Grace suggests that a great project would be a kid's version of Kat Anderson's book.
That would be a great project.
I think I'm not a grade school educator, but isn't that a trend sort of to create kids books, kid versions, right? You know, you need the grade school version, and then later you get to the upper
Yeah.
grades. So Vicky's suggestion to Divya and really to everybody is to go to the Eurostack website. I put a link up there, the protecteurostack.org, and look at the EIR, which is the Environmental Impact Report, and have kids send in comment letters. You know, that's one way to get them, you know, teach them about what's going on. And if you do go to that website, there's a lot of resources there. There's a recording of a workshop that was done a few days ago about how to write those letters. And there's tools on that website that can help you.
They're
Right.
actually planning, the Amah Mutsun are planning a rally in San Jose on September 10th
Yes.
to protect your stock. So that's something that, you know, kids can go to and get involved. You know, start to get a sense of activism in the community.
Yeah.
You know, that's another great way to support as well.
I mean, everyone here should write a letter. I was looking at the,
Yeah.
46 days. The comment period is 60 total, but several days have passed. So there are 46 days left. So I recommend to help would be definitely to go to that website and write a letter. It doesn't have to be a, you know, ecologically perfect letter. It's just, it can be your sentiments and your feelings. This is your, you know, where you identify yourself as a taxpayer if you live here and pay taxes. And that's, you know, so let's see. Yeah, those are very sacred lands and there's no need for the quarry. So I'll stop talking about that. Let's see. Some people put links to the A State of Change book. Kat Anderson's book is awesome. It's quite long. It's quite a big
It is very long.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did I miss any?
Kelvin's asking what time the rally is. I can forward maybe the email for that to maybe Vivian or you, and you can distribute it to your networks.
If you send it to me, I can send it to everybody who's registered on Zoom, and then I can also post it on the YouTube comment section for this talk so that it's visible easily.
There's a Santa Clara Planning Commission public hearing on August 25th, which you can also show up at. And that's on the website. I don't know the time though. And where is the rally? Oh, I used to know where that is.
I'll forward the email to Vivian and she can forward it on to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you navigate to the Amah Mutsun Land Trust website page, it's just amahmutsunlandtrust.org. There's a link in there where you can sign up for their newsletters. And they've been sending out these notices about the various rallies, the EIR report through that newsletter. So you could do that as well.
Yeah. I think when people want to help, the first thing to do is get educated about what's going on. Like you said, Rick, learn the history and learn the current issues. I mean, this proposed mine is a very current issue.
Yeah.
I think we got them all.
Yeah, I don't see any more.
You can sign up to volunteer at the Pie Ranch. You know, all those organizations, you had a great slide that had several organizations listed. You could reach out to them and find ways to, you know, supporting them supports their work.
Yeah, every third Saturday of the month is a work day at Pie Ranch. Right now it starts at 2, goes 2 to 5.
That is a great work day. I really enjoyed the times that we made it out there. Haven't been out for a few months, but I definitely my family and I will be going back. And you know, it's very impactful just in understanding the displacement, because I know that one of the weekends I was there, the member of the Amah Mutsun tribe had driven from Coalinga to be there with the group, and he brought his father and his young sons. And you know, that's a lot of commitment to do that with your family. And I mean, it just really makes you feel it in a way that I think is really important to understand, you know, what we have done, what has happened in California. And, you know, the relearning program, I think, is so important in, well, trying to help right some of these things that happened.
Yeah. I just thought of a question, Rick. Are there particular volunteer days or places or opportunities for younger people, for these, you know, K through, you know, younger kids to volunteer, to get, you know, take part?
Yeah. Well, kids show up all the time at Pie Ranch. I mean,
Okay.
it's a very welcoming, fun environment.
Excellent.
You know, not only do they get to work in the Amah Mutsun Garden, but they can go off and help, you know, work on the farm too, which is often fun for kids as well. So it's the Pie Ranch workday is very family friendly, kid friendly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Is there still also the workday at San Juan Bautista? I haven't been to that one, but I did see that there was another project at San Juan Bautista as well, that the Amah Mutsun.
Yeah. There's the Amah Mutsun Garden at Mission San Juan Bautista. I'm not sure if those work days are still happening at the moment. Yeah.
So was that, I think, did we get everything? Oh wait, is there another one?
There's a lot of thank yous.
Yeah. Oh, and I guess Divya had another question about when are the Thursday workdays at the Arboretum? Is that
The Thursdays, it starts at 9 to noon. We have a volunteer lead, Linda Anderson, who's wonderful, that takes the group out there, and depending on the time of year, you know, it's pruning, weeding, or planting if it's planting season and stuff like that. Just helping us care for that garden.
well, we are actually getting pretty close to 8. So I think this is it. But Rick, again, what an amazing talk. I really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us tonight and help us all understand more about it, what's happened and what we can do. So, and for everybody here, you know, this is recorded on YouTube, so share it with your friends. Let's continue that educational process. And our talk next month is at the first Wednesday in September with Arvind, who will be talking about native plants and gardens. So Rick, thank you. And Gladys, thank you, Kelvin. Thank you everybody for showing up. And I think I'm going to be ending the session now. So good night, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.